Okay, well, happy Wednesday to everybody. Welcome. There's books if you need them. There you go. Tonight we are looking at lesson number 11, page 81 and following. We kind of jumped in on this Sunday and discussed some of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints views. Now, this is entitled Mormons. That's really a name. I was looking at this a little more. It's not a name that people from that church like a whole lot. I mean, they're okay with it. It's not like offensive or anything, but they prefer to say LDS, like Latter-day Saints, and that's fine. So I wouldn't try to just throw derogatory terms around and things that would be perceived as such. But anyways, they'll probably be okay with that. We are going to look at a little bit more at the teaching of that church and also how we go about talking with someone who is from the Mormon faith. What do we do? What sorts of things to bring up? How do we approach that discussion? Because I think it is a different discussion than we would have with other people and probably go in different directions. But before we start, Aaron, Holly, would you care to lead us in a prayer? Amen. Good deal. So I want to remind you of a couple things right now and then move into some other stuff. If you were studying with someone from the LDS group, Latter-day Saints, what version of the Bible should you use? King James, because that's what they would accept. And so just go ahead and do that. Be ready for that. So that would be a good idea. Now, what would you say? And just seeing what you remember from what we discussed, what's some of the biggest differences you see with Latter-day Saints teaching of God and what we would see in the Bible? What sorts of things stand out? Okay, yeah, that God wasn't always God. He used to be a man and then got to the godhood state. And now He is our God, and eventually we can become gods too. So yeah, that is the teaching. What else? Okay, yeah, there you go, plurality. That there is God, but we have all kinds of. You can be a God. We have Jesus, who is a God, and there's different levels. And so yeah, very very much unlimited amount of gods. Anything else? I guess I should say along those lines, the teaching is, where did everything come from? Where was the ultimate beginning? And there's really no answer given. It's like we have an infinite cycle of gods who create people, and those people can eventually become gods, and those new gods will create new planets and have new gods, and so it's a never-ending process, and so it's sort of an infinite, there isn't a beginning and there will not be an ultimate end to all of that. So that's a thing. Anything else that stood out? Aaron? Right. Yeah, they're spirit brothers. So Jesus is the oldest. Lucifer, and when God, Elohim, was trying to figure out what He wanted to do for His planet and had this terms of salvation, he had Jesus and Lucifer, maybe some others, I don't know. At least those two developed their plans. He liked Jesus' plan, did not like Lucifer's. Lucifer got mad, and there was this whole thing. So, yeah, there was that. Yeah.
They also view Michael the Archangel as another depiction of God.
Yes, actually. And in this, we have not so much the Jehovah's Witness belief that Michael became Jesus or that, but he was a separate deity. Something interesting to know. If you are trying to look at the idea of the Trinity, Godhead, 3 in 1, Father, Spirit, Son, if you were trying to study that with Mormons, what their concept of what we mean by Trinity, if you haven't heard this word, it might sound weird, but they argue against modalism. Modalism is a version of the Trinity that says, we have three gods, well, one God in three persons, but it's like one person, one entity can become another entity, and it's like we have the Father here, and then He became Jesus, and they have, because the concept is, what they'll say is, okay, when Jesus is praying to the Father, is He praying to Himself, and is He like answering Himself, and there's this whole logical thing, and that is a modalistic approach to the Trinity, and I hope that's not where we sit with that. But if you're curious about that, Google it. It is a really interesting discussion and will waste hours of your time. But that's the concept there. Not so big on the Trinity. Okay, a couple things that I also want to mention and just sort of throw out there, and don't think we'll spend a whole lot of time on that. But looking at worship in the LDS Church, if you're looking at just a normal like church, what you would consider, you would see like sign, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you would go in that building, you would see similar things to I think what we would experience in most churches or denominations or whatever. The Mormon Temples, the temples, the Latter-day Saints temples, those are really, really different, and you have to have a recommendation from the Latter-day Saints, from the leadership, to be able to enter into a temple. And your temple certificate is only valid for like 2 years, so you have to constantly get like reaffirmed. And they like grill you, ask you questions, make sure that you're up to date with Mormon doctrine and all of that. And so you can go into the temple. Now, what happens in the temple used to be a major secret, and it kind of still is. But there have been a lot of people who have come out of the Mormon faith that have revealed some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in some of the temples. I don't think it would really be helpful to discuss a lot of that in detail. And I don't think that would be your approach if you're wanting to talk to Mormons about their faith, their temple practices, because I don't know how they would take that, honestly. And they call the practices in they say it's sacred, and so that's why we don't talk about it outside. And so that's a lot of interesting things there. You can Google it. There's some YouTube videos. It's really interesting. But there's that. Now, also, there's a practice that they do in the temples that you have probably heard of, baptism for the dead. And the concept is that if you die and are not a Mormon, and maybe you're a Mormon, but you're not even a faithful Mormon, whatever. If you die and don't have a relationship with God, if you're not saved, then what happens is they say that your destination, so there's 3 levels of heaven, and then there's like a layer of hell called outer darkness. Well, what they say is, just to make sure that nobody has to experience outer darkness, they do believe people will go there. But as many people as possible that we can keep out of there, we're going to be baptized on your behalf. So if you die, they keep very detailed genealogies, and they will be baptized for every single person who dies. And that's their goal anyway. That's what they're trying to do. And so they'll be baptized on their behalf, so that way when you are resurrected, then you will have a chance for Mormon missionaries to come to you in that level of heaven or wherever you are in order to teach you. And if you have been baptized or baptized by someone else, through someone else, then you have the ability to move up in levels of heaven. So that's essentially the teaching there. Yeah.
In your study for that, is there anything about, I've heard before websites like Ancestry.com, that was tied, or that was backed by the Church of Latter-day Saints for that purpose of being able to track genealogies?
I saw that there was one major, I didn't look into which one it was, but I think Ancestry, that sounds about right. But because that's what, in order to do this properly, you do have to keep good records and have good ancestry and want to make sure. Because one of the big things that the LDS Church teaches is that we are like a family thing, and we want families to stay together. We want families to be there, and so we want to make sure all of your family is good, even up through however many generations. So, I think that is accurate. Couldn't say 100%.
Do you have to wait until your family dies to be baptized for them?
Yes. Yeah, and the reason there is because what they would say is that while they are living, they have the choice to make, and they have the ability to change. But once they're dead, they can't. And so if they're condemned at the point of death, we have to do something for them in order to get them to where they can be saved.
What's like the view of being baptized multiple times? Like, can the same person be baptized for your own faith and then for X number of people that have passed away?
Yeah.
Is there like a certain path that's frowned upon?
I don't think that there's like a limit. I've heard from some people who've come out of the faith and say that they've done that a lot. So I don't know that there's an upper limit, but they would view that though as you got baptized yourself, and you had to do that. But then all the other times you were baptized, it wasn't really you. It was you were like they'll say the name like they'll say like I baptize you, fill in the blank name. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they'll baptize you. So, yeah, it's very much, I don't know that there is a limit. And, by the way, if you're wondering where that practice came from, there's an obscure passage, 1 Corinthians 15, I think 29? Is it 29? Yeah, that talks about that. I don't know, I really want to get into it. It's a difficult verse. And there's a couple of theories I like on that. The verse says, "Otherwise, what will those do who were baptized for the dead? If the dead were not raised at all, why then are they baptized for them?" A couple of ways to look at that. The pronouns used, Paul mentions they and them. It's like what they did. He didn't say that it was a practice that like he was doing or other people who were faithful were doing. It was just like a practice that some people were doing. But it's also in the middle of this chapter that's talk about the resurrection. And resurrection, if they were saying that there's no resurrection, then why worry about those who have died? Because if there's no resurrection, there's no hope. So a few different things to look at. If you have other questions, ask Michael. He's doing 1 Corinthians. But that was fun. Okay, need to get into some of the nitty-gritty meat stuff of how to discuss things. Because chances are you are going to experience Latter-day Saint that comes to your door, probably two of them, maybe more. But get a knock at the door, and you'll have this discussion, opportunity to have a discussion. Now, when they hand you a Book of Mormon, do you know what they say about it? Obviously, they're going to say this is another testament of Jesus Christ. This is Scripture, just the same as the Bible is, and it doesn't contradict the Bible. They'll say that, and that sort of thing. Do you know what they say to you to tell you how you know if the Book of Mormon is true? Yeah, exactly. They'll say what you got to do is you got to pray about it because you read it, maybe just read a certain section, whatever. But if you pray about it, then God will confirm that Joseph Smith is a true prophet, that this is the Word of God, and that you'll go on from there. Yeah, that's what they say. They're burning in the bosom, and I think that comes from Moroni 10:3 through 5. I'm not going to read all that to you, but it's you could read it for yourself. That's talking about if you pray, you'll get this good feeling, it's burning in the bosom, and you know that it's true because of that feeling that you have. Okay, so that we can do a lot with that. That's really interesting because 1 John 4:1 tells us that we have to test the spirits, right? So we need to have some sort of test. Now, what test do we administer to the spirits? Like, what do we do with that? How can we tell? Is there anything in the Bible that tells you how we can tell if someone is a false prophet or a true prophet? Because that's what 1 John 4:1 says, that test the spirit because there are many false prophets that have gone out in the world. So how can we tell? What they claim is Joseph Smith is a true prophet. What they would say is, well, the burning in the bosom. You pray about it, and you will get a confirmation that this is true. Okay, well, there's that. What would the Bible tell us about how to check to see if a prophet is a true prophet?
Deuteronomy 18 says the prophet
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Deuteronomy 18, 19 through 22. That's the section there. And so, yeah, if someone makes a prophecy and it does not come true, then they are a false prophet. Now, question, how many false prophecies do you have to make before you are considered a false prophet? One would do it. It's kind of like murder. How many people do you have to kill before you're a murderer? But I only killed just one. Like, okay, no, I'm being silly. But to be a true prophet, you have to have 100% accuracy. So if there's any prophecy that does not come true, then it's a false prophet. Keep that in mind, because we will look at some. Now, there's also this teaching in Deuteronomy 14. And this is, I wrote this down. Thomas is mad at me because I didn't put it all together. Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5. That even if someone makes a prophecy and it comes true, if they teach something different about God, if they preach a different God to you, or let's serve these false gods or go after these false gods, if they say that, even if they do miracles, even if they are able to prophesy and it comes true, if that's the case and they tell you to serve false gods, don't believe them, because he said that's from Satan. So, side note, and I really don't want to go down this path too long, but is it possible that someone can make a prophecy and it actually comes true, or maybe there's things that we can't explain? Maybe there's some like weird stuff going on and we can't explain what's going on. Yeah, I think that is very possible. Think about Pharaoh and the Egyptian magicians and what they were able to do. Like, how were they able to do that? I don't know, but they did. But if the teaching is go serve these gods, don't do it. So, like that's important. So, if there is a teaching about God that is not true, then don't listen. Turn to Isaiah 43. All right, Isaiah 43, someone care to read verse 10.
You are my witness, says the Lord, my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me, and understand that I am He. Before me there was no God formed, nor shall there be after me.
Okay, so, God. How many gods were before him? Zero. Yeah, none. No gods formed before him. How many were after? None. I want to read something to you. This is it was called the King Follett Discourse. Follett is F-O-L-L-E-T-T. This was a sermon preached, Joseph Smith, in the 1840s, I think. And it was well recorded, well documented. You can find this everywhere. And I would suggest, actually, you probably should write that down because this is a really interesting thing. King Follett Discourse. But it's like a 14, 15-page thing. You can print it out. You can print out all of it. I only printed out a couple pages of it. But this was Joseph Smith talking about some things. I'm just going to quote a few things from what he said. No, actually, time out. Before I get to that, I want to show you something else because I think this will help even more. Okay. And this, I should have wrote this down somewhere else. There is a passage in Moroni 8, verse 18. This is this is the Book of Mormon. Moroni 8, 18. Yes. Yeah. Moroni. Oh, yep. Yeah, good trivia there. Moroni's name of the angel and is the last book or section in the Book of Mormon. Anyways, Moroni 8 verse 18 says, "For I know that God is not a partial God, neither a changeable being, but He is unchangeable from all eternity to all eternity." That's a very clear statement about who God is, right? That He's unchangeable from all eternity to all eternity. Yeah. That's the question. That is the question. And some people be like, well, where did the Mormons actually teach that? That's where this comes in. So I want to show you something. And you can, if you want to have further documentation for that, there's another book that they use called Doctrine and Covenants. If you look at Doctrine and Covenants, section 20, verse 17, it also talks about the same thing. God is infinite, eternal, those sorts of things. So just remember that phrase, though. But he is unchangeable from all eternity to all eternity. In Joseph Smith's King Follett Discourse, the sermon he gave, he said, "We have imagined and supposed that God was God from all eternity." This is interesting because he uses the same phrase that he used in the Book of Mormon. And the Book of Mormon, remember, came from Joseph Smith. He's the one who wrote that. So in the Book of Mormon, he said that God is God from all eternity to all eternity. Here it says, "We have imagined, supposed that God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea and take away the veil so that you may see." Then he says a few other things, and then he says, "He was a man once like us, yea, that God himself, the Father of us all, dwelt on an earth the same as Jesus Christ himself did, and I will show it from the Bible." So that statement there, that's pretty clear what he's saying there. That you thought that God was God from all eternity, but I'm going to refute that. It came from the Book of Mormon that he said that God was God from all eternity, but that's interesting. So that's something to point to, and I think that helps to sort of get this discussion started. Now, what some people will say to that, if you show that to someone who is LDS, they might say, well, the word eternity there, it's kind of loose. Maybe it's talking to just a really long time, or like eons or something. So the question I would have is, okay, well, if that's the case, in Moroni 8:18, it says he was unchangeable from all eternity to all eternity. So if there was he was just for a long time beforehand, when does that end? Because if eternity means a short time here, or even a long time here, it'd have to be the same thing on the other side.
All
Yeah.
is pretty inclusive.
It is, yeah. All is a pretty big word for such a small word. Yeah. So that's something to look at, and I think that could be a conversation starter as well. Now, something that I meant to say when we were talking about the feelings and letting pray, and if you receive a good feeling, then that means that you have the truth, and this is what you need to do. A couple passages to look at there, and it's good to write these down. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things, who can know it? So that was Jeremiah 17, verse 9. And Proverbs 28:26. That is a decent one as well. Basically, if you trust in your heart, you're a fool. I'll read that one. 28:26. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool. And so that's interesting just because if our heart, if our feelings is what drives us to find biblical truth, then why did Jeremiah say that it was deceitful above all things, who can know it? And if you trust in your own heart, you're a fool. Here in Proverbs. And so this is why, by the way, connecting the dots, I'm not just throwing that out there just to say, bam, look at that. But it's let's seriously consider, how do we know if things are true? If someone is a true prophet? If this is really from God? Well, you compare it with what God has said. And we know for a fact that what God said in the Bible is true. And so we can start there. And I think they would say that that's true. Even though I think Mormons would say that the Bible has been corrupted, the things that are in the Bible should be true. I think we could find truth in that. And so, that's something. You might even want to bring up Acts 17:11 in that discussion, because you remember what the people in Berea did that was so good? Yeah, what they had for their Bible at the time. Yeah, they searched the Scriptures daily, even though the person teaching them was an apostle of God, an apostle himself, Paul. He was teaching them. But still, they searched the Scriptures daily to make sure those things were so. And so it's we have to confirm with what we know in the Word. Not just a good feeling, but something that's there. Yes? Well, the thing is, their version, I would say that for the most part, they would just use King James. The Joseph Smith translation is not a commonly used thing. I don't think it's quite finished, to be honest. I don't think he finished everything that he had intended to do. But you may find some groups that use that, but I would say for the most part, they would just use King James. So like what I showed you last time with the addition to Genesis 50, like those last few verses, some of them might not even know that was a thing. So that's something interesting to share with them as well. Go.
So Holly brings up a good verse that I wonder how they would respond to Galatians 1:8, which says, even if we, the apostles, even
Yep.
if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, let him be accursed.
Yeah.
I wonder how they would respond to, I mean, short of, we agree with that, but the gospel that's telling you is maybe been corrupted.
I tried this in a real life discussion, and that's exactly what was told to me. It was that what you have as the gospel, what you think is the gospel, is perverted, and it's not true. And so that's why we have this other testament to show what the true gospel was. And they'll say this is what Jesus brought to the people of the Americas. And Jesus himself went and taught the people. And that's why they have the same gospel that the people in Palestine should have gotten. But the one from the Americas has been preserved for us. That one that we have in the Bible has been corrupted. So yeah, that's exactly what they would say. They would say it's not another gospel. It's actually the true gospel. So that would be where that discussion goes.
It sounds like the only way to make headway in a conversation is to establish what is God's word.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to come to an agreement. If we can't come to an agreement on that, there's really no way forward.
Right. And that's why I would suggest just doing these things where you're showing that Joseph Smith isn't who they think he is. If you can prove that, okay, so that was just proving that his teaching does not align with what the Bible teaches. Actually, it doesn't align completely with what the Book of Mormon said either, with who God was and how long he existed and all that. I think that is huge. Like, if you can do that. Now, there are several ways you can approach false prophecy. Now, if you start out the gate saying, hey, Joseph Smith is a false prophet and I'm going to show you and you're wrong, simmer down. They will not listen. I mean, that's not going to go anywhere. I mean, that's bad etiquette in general. Like, don't do that. That's just mean. But the way you can phrase it and the way you can go about this, something along the lines of, I've looked into some of this, and maybe you can help me with this, but I just don't find evidence that can support me believing that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And maybe even ask, if I show you some things, can you help me work through that to see how I can have faith that he was a true prophet? And maybe working from that angle, that might be a better approach. Because if you come out guns blazing at the beginning, that's not going to be a good discussion at all. Yeah. Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, when we approach that, if Joseph Smith is a true prophet, I want to hear him. I want to listen to him, right? And that's the way we need to approach. Because if he is, then that means what he said was true, and I need to listen to that. And so, be completely upfront about that. Yeah, if he is true, I want to listen. And so we really, really want to be upfront about that. But it is, we're wanting them to confront some things that they may have not seen or heard yet. And we touched on this a little bit Sunday, but there is a major division in LDS teaching. They call some of the teaching milk and some is meat. The teachings that they would say, Jesus is God and he is the Savior, and what we would see in mainstream Christianity, I think, is what they would consider milk. Now, some of the advanced doctrines, some of the meat, would be things like God used to be a man, and that you can be a God. And maybe even some of the polygamous teaching and again, as we said, most mainstream LDS members are not polygamist. Some are, there are some places. But there's a big teaching that in the celestial kingdom, afterward, eternity, like that, there will be some polygamy there. So anyways, there's that. Okay, where was I going with that? Yeah, go ahead. Right. I would say it would be kind of a mixed bag, maybe. Most of the Mormon missionaries that you encounter, well, I don't know about most. I would say a lot of them have been trained on how to initiate conversations and how to have like a basic level conversation with people. It's a flip of the coin whether or not you're going to run into somebody who actually knows that they believe what we read with the King Follett discussion, that God used to be a man and that you can be a God. They actually, it's during that 2-year missionary period where a lot of people learn what like the nuts and bolts are and some of the things that people bring up all the time, how many wives Joseph Smith had, and that some of those wives were married to other people at the time, and there was one that was 14. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that they bring out, and it's one of those things where they are being taught that you are going to hear a bunch of things that just are lies, that aren't true, and that if you have something that really makes you question things, come back to us and we'll help you with that. And so chances are you might find somebody who doesn't know some of those like buried secrets. I don't want to call them that, but yeah.
Is there any major commonalities that is there?
That's hard. And the reason I say that's hard is because we would use a lot of the same words, but the words that they're using would not mean the same things that we mean. Because, we would say, we serve one God. I think they would tell you that. They would tell you the same thing. But, their concept ultimately of who God is and where that came from, I think that they would believe in the person of Jesus. They would believe in the crucifixion. There's a lot. And actually, that's one commonality that I used to have a conversation one time. I had like 3 studies with this group because I was discussing, the evidences of the resurrection are just amazing. And we talked about, we had several studies just on like the historical account of the resurrection of Christ. And like they were all about that, and that was awesome. And so that could honestly be a way that you could start a conversation and connect, because it's like, hey, you believe in Jesus, I believe in Jesus, let's talk about this. And I think that helps open the door for sure. So I would say ultimately, there's a lot of things that we'd probably say the same thing about, but they might be meaning something different. It might not be a bad idea, another thing, to ask them to define, like, what do you mean by that? What you say, Jesus is the Savior. How does that work? What does that look like? And so just to establish where they are. Because, it's one of those things, I don't know that I want to tell them, hey, these are all the things that you should believe. And I'm going to tell you why I don't think those things are true, because they might not believe those things. You know what I mean? And so it's good to have those conversations, to ask questions, see where they are in their discussion. There's some, I watched, it was kind of a training video it was a professor, BYU, Brigham Young. Do you know who Brigham Young is? He was like the 2nd president of the LDS Church. And the president is like the prophet, the chosen prophet. And of a major group of LDS, I should say that. Have more to say on that later. But there was some teaching from a professor there.
Wasn't he the one that led the Mormons to?
Yeah, exactly. They kind of got chased out of Missouri. And there's a whole thing behind that you can look into. Is really interesting. But yeah, he brought them to Utah. And so what we would know as mainly the LDS group. Now, there are several like splintered factions after Joseph Smith died. The largest one that we would consider the LDS Church now was led by Brigham Young, and we have the current president is Russell M. Nelson, and he is the prophet, the one truly inspired right now, and we have all that. This is something else to think about, because if you're approaching someone and they're telling you need to pray to see if this is true, see if he is the true prophet and all that. These other groups, there's the Community of Christ, who is an offshoot of the LDS Church. They have another prophet, Stephen Vesey, is their true prophet. The FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, their main prophet right now is Warren Jeffs. And so you have these three groups that all say, to know if this is true, you need to pray and have this feeling and all that. And so one thing that you could just pose to them, it's like, okay, if all of these groups look at someone else as being the true prophet right now, and they all have prayed and have that feeling, how do we know which one is right? And how can we tell which one is the true prophet of God? And that's something to consider and pose to them as well. Maybe they'll have an answer, maybe not. I'm not sure. And to go along with that, John 16, 2 and 3, it's a passage that says, there'll be many who are thinking they're doing the will of the Father, but they're really like killing you, which is not a good thing. And so just having a good feeling doesn't mean that it's from God or that you're doing the right thing. Because Satan can influence us in that way too. Along those lines, think about this. In the early days of Joseph Smith's teaching, when he had the Book of Mormon written, but he was looking to publish it. He wanted to get it out there. He had a problem finding someone to publish it and getting enough money to make sure that they can do that. He had a vision. There was a revelation, what he said was from God, that said, what you need to do is go to Canada. And when you go to Canada, you're going to find a publishing company. Someone's going to do that. You're going to raise money. You're going to have enough, and you're going to be able to sell the Book of Mormon. So he sent two of his guys up to Canada. And do you know what happened? They did not get the funding for the Book of Mormon. Couldn't do it. They went publisher to publisher. Nobody would do it, and they couldn't get it. And so they came back, and they were like, what happened? As they should. And Joseph Smith, after a little while, got another revelation that said, no, that wasn't true. And so then they went on from there. And then what he said was that sometimes there are three different types of prophecies. Because there can be a prophecy that actually came from God. There can be a prophecy that comes from Satan. Or there can be a prophecy that comes from a person himself. So, made it up. And he said, this last prophecy must have been something that just came from myself. And I didn't realize that. So, think about that. Think about the logic of that. If it's possible for Joseph Smith, the prophet, to get a revelation that ends up not being true, but he thought it was true, how can we trust any of those feelings of the revelation, of anything like that? Now, if that's the sort of reasoning, the line of reasoning you want to go through, make sure to look those up. Get those. What's it called? References. There we go. References to where those were quoted. I think there's some in Doctrine and Covenants, but also there's some journals. I can get you that information if that's the way you want to go, or you can Google it. It's out there. It's called the Toronto Incident. So if you Google Toronto Incident, Joseph Smith, you'll find plenty on that, I am sure. So that is an interesting thing to think about. Joseph Smith also made a prophecy that there was going to be a temple that is constructed in eastern Missouri, and there was a very specific place, and he pointed out, this is the place where this is going to happen, and we're going to have this temple here. And he said, it's something along the lines of, before this generation passes away, this will happen. And so that was a very bold, strong statement, right? Well, it turned out it didn't happen. And so there was a teaching 39 years later. It was in the general, you can look this up, and I'm going to say it, so if you're like watching the video of this lesson replayed, you can look it up from there. General Discourses, Volume 14, Discourse number 38, page 275. It was from Orson Pratt, an apostle of the LDS Church. And he addressed it publicly. And he said, okay, 39 years have passed, and there's a lot of people saying that, I don't know if this is going to come to pass, because like in their minds, a generation equals 40 years. And so he said, even though it's been 39 years, don't give up, because there's just as much certainty that this prophecy is going to come true as there is on my salvation. And came out and said that it will be this land here, right? And he was like, this specific place, it will happen. And he said, within the lifetime of those who were alive when the prophecy was made in 1832. I think this is helpful because how many people do you know that were alive in 1832? There is not a person. So like that's just an interesting approach there. That was a prophecy that did not come to pass. There's one more thing. There's a few more things I want to do, but I'll just do this. Something that's interesting. Brigham Young. You can Google this. If you Google Brigham Young, Adam God theory, you'll get some information where Brigham Young was quoted several times as coming up with this idea that Adam was God, that Adam was actually the eternal Father, that Adam was God. And there's a few different places he quoted it. Brigham, by the way, I'll also throw this in there as a side note. Brigham Young also said, I have never yet preached a sermon and sent it out to the children of men that they may not call Scripture. So he says everything he says is Scripture. He also said that Adam was God a few times. Then later on, there was some church teaching that said, no, that was false teaching. That was false doctrine. And then later on, it was said it was just a theory. It wasn't really weighted. Just look into that. There's a lot of discrepancy there. I think that helps. Look at that a little bit. There's some teaching. Well, you can find that. That'll be good. There's other things I would like to mention, but we're not going to have time, and that's okay. If you are curious of some other things, you can ask me, and we'll talk about it. There are tons of other things that I didn't even get to scratch the surface on, because like there's a lot. But to be prepared for this, well, you need to be prepared. You need to think through some of that. And if you're able to get like printed copies of some of this stuff, if you can get like actual physical copies, that would be better. And some of this, you can find this. You can find these online pretty easily. The King Follett Discourse, like you just type it in Google and then boom, it gives you the whole thing. There's a thing called the Lectures on Faith. And if you go to lecturesonfaith.com, it gives you this whole thing. The book, The Doctrine and Covenants, actually in 1921, in 1921, the book, The Doctrine and Covenants, the entire doctrine section was removed. And so all that we really have left are the covenants. But the whole section of the doctrine was from a book called, it was Lectures on Faith. And it was these lectures on faith. And it would be like general teaching, and then at the end of each one, there was like questions and answers. Those are really interesting to look through. I think there's a reason why they were removed, but you can gain access to that pretty easily. So look into that a little bit as well. Just to be prepared to have those discussions. But again, we love these people. We want to be able to show them the gospel unfiltered, without these preconceived notions. And it's hard, and you might think that the conversation you have is worthless and that it doesn't get anywhere and you're just spinning your wheels and it's like not sinking in. But you never know, because a lot of the people that I looked at and heard from that came out of the Mormon faith, it was like 10, 15 years after that initial discussion that it was just like stuff was going on in their mind and they were thinking and they investigated it on their own. It was like, whoa, Okay, that's major. So you might not ever know like what happens to a person that you talk to, but any chance that we get, man, if someone knocks on your door, answer it. Open it up, have that conversation, talk to them, because you never know what could happen, what could come from that. Any other questions, thoughts, anything you want to know about?
Just like to make a comment on they'll call it heaven and three levels there, very strange concept, especially the third level, the celestial heaven, located on the renewed earth, is for faithful Mormons who have married in heaven and have produced spirit children who have advanced into the state of God.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And something that I don't think that a lot of us were familiar with before. I know I didn't know all of that. And again, one of the meat doctrines that your everyday missionary might not know either. And all of that, the three levels of heaven, that came from their understanding of 2 Corinthians 12, when Paul mentions called up to the third heaven, which I think the way that people understood that in the first century was way different than what that rendition was. So it is really interesting. And that's why one of the things, like to go to the highest level of heaven, you have to be married. You have to be sealed in a Mormon temple marriage, like sealed for all time and eternity. Because they say, regular marriage is just for life. But if you're sealed in the temple, it's forever, all eternity. And that's one of the prerequisites to get to the celestial kingdom. It is interesting. Well, on that note, that's it. I don't know what we're doing Sunday. If you have something that you want to do, if you want to do Christian Science, let me know. We'll do that. If you want to do just like general, like what sorts of things do atheists say? What kind of conversations do we need to have there? If there's any topic that you want to talk about, let me know, and I can work that up for next Sunday and Wednesday. The final week, we're going to do Scientology. So, be ready for that. Thanks, everybody.